Hi, everyone. Me again. Sorry, I think not everyone's here right now, but I think we're running a bit behind on schedule, so I'll just go ahead and intro John, who will be speaking. So most of you know way more about John than I do, but maybe I can offer some perspective I have as my dad's son. So John and Dad have a fairly long history going back to 2000, when Dad first came to Caltech, and in the next decade became each other's most frequent collaborators of all time. So Google Scholar shows that both of them have an H-index of 100, so that's 100 papers with over 100 citations each. And they are co-authors on 15 of these. 14 of them were from 2001 to 2010, and so most of those papers were on internet control and architecture. John claims the resulting theories of architectures are universal, and he has focused on them since, applying them to bio, to med, neuro, eco, and social systems. Dad similarly shifted focus to control and architecture in energy systems. John will tell us a bit about this and a recent 2019 paper on systems-level synthesis, which is probably their biggest theoretical result on the subject so far. The next most frequent co-authors of Dad's are Lijun and Lina, who very kindly organized this event. Officially, they were John's students, but they have 19 papers with Stephen and only 6 with John. So maybe John has some explaining to do. Hopefully, John will talk a little bit more about that, as well as the significance of the last paper in 2010 on power systems. John has also many other contributions beyond recruiting students for Dad, which happened mostly in the 2000s when he first came to Caltech. His other main collaborator on architecture in biology and medicine is his MD PhD wife, Marie Cheta. She has an interesting history with Caltech as well. They have a cover article in 2002 in Science Magazine on architecture and systems biology, and that's been a major focus of his ever since. John's most infamous paper is his first from 1978, with the shortest abstract in all of IEEE history. There are none. This is based on results from his bachelor's thesis at MIT on synchronous machines, for which he got the IEEE Power Systems Hickornell Award. This was followed by a series of solo author papers in the 70s that counterexamples to everything in control theory at the time. Turns out none of them properly treated robustness. Robust control was an attempt to rebuild on the resulting ruins, and John had lots of great co-authors like Keith Glover and Andy Packard. No co-authors were American professors until he came to Caltech in 1985, so that seems to be a pattern. The next event that really stands out is in 1994, when he won the 1-hour time trial at the International Human-Powered Vehicle World Championship. He has other awards and prizes and fabulous students, but to an outsider, they all sound mostly the same, whereas this one is really different. He rode for the UC Berkeley team on a bike built by undergrads. The faculty advisor was the same Andy Packard, and the competition had pro bike engineers and pro riders, but the undergrads and some old alum ended up beating them. John also added a world record in championship in rowing that year, but that was for the over 40 age group, so maybe a bit less interesting. But in addition to counterexamples, recruiting, and racing, he does research on nearly anything that has an architecture, which is apparently everything since bacteria, and he'll tell us more.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so it's been kind of a long day, I realize, and I'm supposed to do 45 minutes. I'll try to keep it shorter than that. But I have like 400 slides, so it'll probably be more of a movie. So anyway, I titled my favorite architect. So I thought this was going to be a roast. And so then they asked me for a title. I'm going, wait a second. You want me to give a talk? I go, yeah. I thought it was a roast. They go, will we be able to tell? I go, no, that's okay. So you're going to hear a lot about diversity here. And it's not diversity like we hear it debated right now. It's something different. It's a lot weirder. But I'm going to show that the reason we have architecture is to create something called diversity-enabled sweet spots. So diversity is really good, but it's also essential that you have shared values. If you don't have a shared protocol, and I'll give more examples of this. And this is a picture. Can anybody guess how old he was? I have no idea. Like, it's somewhere between 30 and 60, but anyway. So an example of extreme diversity is actually Stephen and I. Okay, so I'll give you a few of these as we go on. So I'll just give you a couple of. So one of the things we have that's shared is we really value rigor. Okay, but then there's some stuff that we're like completely different. So Stephen is quite humble, and he's also like fairly serious. And so I bring a lot of diversity to that, okay? So now, not so much across campus where nobody's humble, but in CMS, I mean, Adam, like, ridiculous how humble these people are. Okay, anyway, so what I didn't actually know until we checked that he and I are our most common co-authors. So we have, in our top 100 cited papers, we have 15. And that's more than Keith Glover, if you know Keith Glover. And so that's amazing. I didn't know that, okay? So, and these are the top 4, and I'm going to talk a little bit about these. In fact, I'm going to not talk, you heard a lot about congestion control, this kind of stuff this morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about this layering as optimization, but not much in the internet, but in other areas. And then I'll talk a little bit about this. And this was quite a story. Anyway, so let me just tell you about this my first paper. You heard about this, which was 1978. And this actually, I did this work when I was my senior thesis at MIT. But it took you can imagine it took a while to publish because the people at MIT ran the journals. And it was like, over their dead bodies, this is going to get published. And it turned out they actually didn't want to stop it. They wanted to slow it down so they could get ahead of the next wave. So they jumped on this a lot. But at the time, it looked like they were trying to stop me. Anyway, so this is like Control Theory 1976, and it's like a house of cards. And so the hard work was actually getting an analytic example you could do by hand. So what I'd actually done in 76 was, and you're not going to believe me, but this is actually true. I had card deck, and I would take it and I'd give the card deck in, and I'd come back the next day and get this thing, they called them a printout. You guys have never heard this, but really, they had printouts. No screens, just printouts. Okay, so you look at it, it would say syntax error. Okay. So you do that for like a week, and finally it runs, and then you get back and you get like 0 margins. Okay, I go, okay, cool. But then how do you convince anybody of that, right? Anyway, so you had to get an analytic thing. That took a while, okay. And then there was this paper, which was the other one in 78. And this was a counterexample to LQG. This was a counterexample to everything else, okay. So I had a bit of a reputation at that time. But I didn't care. I figured I can't do a PhD in this country. Like, I don't care. But then the problem was I was here. And then the winter of 77, 78 hit, and it's like, okay, I got to go to California somewhere. So I go to Berkeley. And the good thing was, well, I'll say that Berkeley was fabulous. I love Berkeley. So this was the kind of two things. So what I tried to get was one of these generative AIs. I put in a bunch of data from the 70s and stuff like that and tried to say, like, can you just give us like a movie theme for what would be the 70s? So they came up with this. And so I was going, like, what? And I go, actually, this isn't bad, right? I mean, the guys were really pretty awful bullies. They weren't vampires, but so staking them was kind of fun. And I twisted the knife a bit, obviously, so with that abstract. But then you want to maybe light a candle, right? I'm still going to curse the darkness, but maybe I can light a candle. So these were the papers that started robust control. And the thing I was just going to say about this was, when I started my thesis at Berkeley, or started research at Berkeley in the late 70s, this was the most pure part of mathematics. Hardy spaces. Hardy wrote a book called The Mathematician's Apology, and he says, in all parts of mathematics, it starts out pure, and then everything eventually is applied, okay? That's Hardy. And so when I started, he was right. This was like the purest of pure. And my advisor for this, Don Saracen, who was maybe the world's expert on Hardy spaces, it was a pure math problem, and I told him I had motivation for it from applied, sort of applications in aerospace. He says, never tell me why you want to do this. The math stands alone, that's it, okay. And he was wonderful. So, but of course, we never wrote a paper together. But anyway, these co-authors are fabulous. So I eventually started writing papers with other professors, but this was, obviously after I'd come to MIT. So also, I just want to note on this paper, even my friends say this is the worst paper in the history of control theory. And there's lots of reasons for it, but one of them is it's just a lousy paper. And you know why? Because they let me really control the final version. never, ever do that. You know, my students know that, right? But these guys were, and these are like the best writers possible. They're fabulous, they're so good, they're wonderful, and they deferred to me. And so one of the things I learned is just make sure people know not to do that, right? So anyway, okay. So little competition here. Oh yes, 3-word abstract, we're gonna come up with a 1-word abstract, okay? So pretty friendly, so this was, and officially Jintao was my student, but obviously, so that's typical. Like, I recruit them and then they work with Stephen, okay. But that's worked out really well. So let me just give you an example. So how many people here could roughly be considered one of my, that is, you recruited you to Caltech, I recruited you, and you're sort of at some point was my advisee. How many of you here are, right? And then James, where's James? He's a grandson. So his advisor at Oxford was my student. So I'll count. Put your hand up, okay. Put your hand back up, put your hand back up, okay. How many of you have written a paper with me? Okay, some of them. How many of you have written more papers than me than with Stephen? No, I checked, no. I don't know, anyway. So there's another point of diversity. So I recruit them and then Stephen works with them, right? That's worked out really well. The problem is they want to work in biology or neuroscience or wildfire ecology or stuff like that then. They're stuck with me, okay. So these are some papers that we wrote together. And like, I want to just add this one, 2010. Notice it's not on internet, it's on power systems. So this is when Stephen moved to power systems. And like, okay, I can't work on this anymore. And so I started, I'd always worked on power at some level, but now have to switch to power. Stephen switched to, because, so one thing I've always done is I've been really lucky. In everything I've ever worked on, I got the best person in the world to work on it with me. So Gunter Stein in the aerospace industry, Manfred Merari in process control, Stephen Lowe in the internet. Stephen Lowe gets out of the internet, like, who's number 2? There's a whole bunch of candidates for number 2. Walter Willinger, so I kept working with him. But you have to switch to that power, right? So I didn't switch so much as he did, but you have to switch at that point. Okay. But also notice this is our 2 organizers, right? So this is how I get a paper with my students, is to write one with Stephen, and then they add me at the end, like for marketing purposes, I guess. Anyway, but this is the paper, this is the big paper, and this is, and again, I'm highlighting James Anderson, who is my student and also was a postdoc here. And then this guy, he's the real expert on all this stuff. And you can see we'll see this. Okay, so you notice Wang and Motney. So let me just give you a quick, I shouldn't spend too much time in this, but this problem was just a nightmare in control theory. The problem that this solves. And, but we weren't, like, it wasn't really nailed down. There was a counterexample, or there's this famous Witzenhausen's counterexample and stuff, but it wasn't really clear how hard these class of problems. I'll try to, if we have time, I'll get to what these class of problems are. But the idea was, I told, Wang and Motney, I said, look, I think this is the problem that we can prove definitively is NP-hard. It's right in the boundary. If we prove this is NP-hard, then we know this is really, really bad. So they come back to me and say, it's not NP-hard. It's like polynomial time, but it's like order 1 and the size of the total network. I've never been happier to be wrong in my life. And so this work, I think, is, at least of all the stuff I've ever worked on, is the most significant. And so really fun. And then obviously, whose name shows up? Well, he was a lot of the motivation for this from the beginning, right? And he's been very involved in this. So if you want to actually know what this is, well, James is here. Nick, you can get by email, and Stephen's also here. And at last resort, you can ask me. Okay, so this was a huge thing. So why was this so important to me? This layering architecture was because this is why I wrote with my wife. who also I have a lot of papers co-authored with, but nowhere near as many as Stephen. And she's like going, I was telling her about this stuff. She goes, yeah, and he got you to do all that without having to marry him? Anyway, so I go, yeah, anyway. So that one not worked out. So, so we had this, and we're trying to understand the architecture of biology. When we started really understanding it, we found out layering, and the way to think about the layering is very similar to how Stephen was talking about the internet. So all the stuff that Stephen had done for the internet, a really easy problem, by the way, it turned out. So that was one of the things that I remember. I was on the search committee for Stephen, and there's some controversy about what I've contributed most to Caltech. So there's the people who, on the one hand, think I was on Stephen's search committee and we hired Stephen. That's my greatest contribution to Caltech. And then there's the other people who go, no. He was on the search committee that hired Richard Murray, right? So that's the biggest thing he's done to Caltech. Now, everybody agrees the rest is rubbish, but there's some controversy over whether it was Stephen Lowe or anyway. So anyway, so I was getting interested in this biology stuff, and these ideas, which we developed somewhat together, but really he was the starter here, was really instrumental in how we started thinking about biology, and particularly motivated by the kinds of things in these papers. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. We might do a simple example, but one of the things was, like, I was a search committee, and I had not. So you're supposed to at least have some idea who the candidate is, and so I had the file, and I just didn't get to it. So I go to the talk, and he gives this talk on internet congestion control with Lapsley, who's here somewhere, and so. Yeah, okay. So, and I'm just looking at this and I go, no way. No way. It can't be. I've been worried about this distributed control problem like for a long time, and this was no way this works, right? But I'm Mr. Counterexample, right? So I go home that night, get out the paper, and I'm going to get a counterexample, and we're going to be done with this. And then I look at it and I go, wow. This is fabulous. So I go back the next day and we go, we got to hire this guy. We got to hire this guy. So that was a real. So now the thing as it turns out is controlling queues is actually really easy by comparison to controlling anything else. Okay. So but what you want to do is you want to find the simplest problem you don't understand. And then you see that solution and you go, okay, what's the next problem? What's the next problem? So he took and said, here's the simplest problem we don't understand, and here's the solution. And it was gorgeous, it was fabulous, and you've heard all about it this morning, so I won't talk about it. But anyway, okay, so this is all the biology I was doing at the time in parallel with this. And this is like weird thing is this is one of my most cited papers, Systems Biology Markup Language. It was just like basically infrastructure, and I came up with this idea, at a bar in Tokyo at midnight after a conference, and so I was talking to this guy, and Catano, you may have heard of Catano, anyway. So he was at the time the youngest person on the board of directors of Sony, and he was interested in systems biology. I said, we got to do this. We're getting this Tower of Babel out there, okay? And again, I don't know about software stuff very well, but I knew that we had to think about what was going to be the waste of the hourglass for this setting. And so I came up with this idea, and he said, could you do that at Caltech? I go, I'm not any good at this. He says, just put a team together, and could you make that happen? I go, yeah. And he said, how much does it cost? He go, $1 million. He goes, yeah, okay. Anyway, and that's where SBML got started. Now everybody uses it. And I wrote no code, right? All I did was put together the team, which is a huge team. Like it goes on for, like a long way. So, and so I was really interested in trying to understand these things, and this was, around the same time. So this is one of the papers, and this will give you a preview of something that Stephen and I ran into on the internet, okay? So this is this paper in Science, glycolytic oscillations and limits on robust. I'll give a simple version, which is, in laboratory conditions, you can get yeast to oscillate. Actually, yeast extract. So you take extract from yeast, put it in a test tube, put it in some conditions, and it oscillates. Why, right? What's the function? So people have been working on explaining why are these oscillations there. What's the purpose of these oscillations? And so we paper and go, look, there's no purpose. It's just Bode's integral formula. You got a feedback with autocatalysis. It's going to oscillate in the lab it's not going to oscillate in the wild because they have all these other control systems that take care of it, right? So it's a robust system, but if you take it out and put it in an extract, it's going to be fragile. And so then we asked around, has anybody ever seen this in intact cells? No. Wasn't that important? Anyway, so this was the place where we said, universal laws. So the idea is that it's impossible to get down here, but if you do it with diversity sweet spots, you can. Speed accuracy trade-offs, you'll hear a lot about that. Turing, Shannon, Boddy. There's all these things that we know in engineering, but they equally apply to biology, and there's nothing like this in physics. So what architecture does is it says we can have this trade-off where we are either cheap or robust, but not both. And then what you do is you create a diversity-enabled sweet spot, and that's why we have architecture, is to do what you can't do with one part alone. You combine parts, okay? So this is what the reviewers said. So they just said basically, this is the biggest pile of crap we've ever seen in citations, so total blowback, okay? These were all probably ex-physicists who did. So you can read so how did it get, well, so it's a miracle this got published, right? Because you get reviews like this, and that's it, right? But we had this fantastic editor, and well, the other half of the reviews were like, best paper I've ever seen in biology, okay? So she's going like, I want to know the answer. And then she went to the editor-in-chief and she goes, you got to know the answer. So she got reviewers of the reviewers, right? And eventually got through, but these people never changed their mind. They still haven't, okay? So that's a challenge, okay? So there's lots of layered architectures. These are a few examples that we've been working on. But the best one is basically bacteria. They're perfection. Like everything's evolved since then, and it's kind of been a little shaky since then. And then, of course, the stuff we're most familiar with is our cell phones, where we have the apps, lots and lots of apps, diversity. We all have the same operating system, more or less, a couple of variants, and then some variability in the hardware, okay? And so these layered architectures, it's basically bacteria and the cell phones have the same architecture, even though doing something completely different. Okay, so those are the good examples. One of the things that's cool about this is it contains its own supply chain, right? We don't do that, right? Our cell phones don't self-replicate. That would be a huge hassle. So just imagining having a cell phone that's self-replicated, right? We can't do that, right? Bacteria have been doing it for 3 billion years, okay? So we'll talk a little about brain. So lots of examples, okay? So let's just, again, you guys all know this, but the kids might not. Okay, so suppose you're doing Zoom over a network, right? So the idea is that you might have a bunch of people doing this, but and what are we using? We're using language, which itself is a layered architecture, on top of apps, on top of network, and the network is all global. So you can talk to anybody on the planet using this app, right? So it's everything below that is virtualized. So you don't even know where they are most of the time, okay? But then there's all this stuff down below, right? And so it's this layered architecture that makes it possible for you to ignore that it's there. So if you don't do this right, you actually are aware that there's a network down there. But most of the time, you're absolutely unaware that there's anything going on. And that's because it has this layered architecture. And I think Stephen was one of the people who really first started. So this is all a huge hack, right? I mean, the thing is, I know the people who did this, and they are artistic geniuses. I mean, they are geniuses. The problem with having geniuses do architecture instead of theory is there's unintended consequences. So you can imagine one guy going like, yeah, all these animals, like, we're using animals for everything. Like, there's poop everywhere. But there's all these fossil fuels. Let's burn them like mad. What could go wrong, right? So you want someone thinking ahead on those kinds of architectural decisions, okay? But it's all virtualized, okay? And the idea is that we can swap apps, and then we can connect those apps and talk to each other no matter where we are, right? And again, all this is down here is all virtualized. So you need an operating system. But the operating system is not, the apps are incredibly diverse, the operating system much less so. In the internet, it's like TCP/IP, that kind of stuff, okay? So that's all virtualized. But then, in fact, the OSs aren't connected to each other. They're just sitting on top of hardware, and the hardware is physically connected. So again, you all know this, but maybe she doesn't know. But that you got, this hardware layer down here. So this paper. So you already saw what kind of reactions my work gets from physicists. Well, so we wrote these papers in the internet community, and then this thing hit. The Achilles heel of the internet. What this paper said is there's these gigantic routers in the middle of the internet. If those would ever go out, the whole internet would fall apart. Everybody picked up on this. Physicists have found the Achilles heel of the internet, right? Great title. Webb's Achilles heel could be, all this kind of, so what was going on here? Well, here's the thing. So what's going on? In this theory, layered architecture stuff, you have two things, and we heard a lot about this morning, right? You have performance that you want the network as a whole to perform, and then you have hardware that you want to run that on, and the hardware has hard constraints on bandwidth and delay and degree and stuff like that. Okay, so we understand how that works. So you have this problem, and then the question is, what's an optimal design? And this is an example of something. We just optimized something. We put a whole bunch of different constraints in. But you get this kind of topology. And these are bandwidths on the links, okay? But what if you completely throw those away? Suppose you don't know that there's layering. Suppose you don't know that there's anything like performance or function, right? Because function is a really debated topic in biology, because everybody's saying, it's just evolution by point mutations. How could we end up with function, right? You can look back and say there's function, but what does that even mean? And what do you mean by constraints? And what's a router, right? So if you just think of the internet as a random graph, and I'm going to skip a whole bunch of mistakes this thing made and give them all these mistakes and say, what if they were even right there? Okay. So this is the most likely network if you just said, let's just take the node degrees and make a random network. That's the most likely thing to have. So you can imagine, if you think about the ice in the glass, right? It's all melting. But if you went in there and took a knife and stirred it around, wouldn't make any difference, okay? Most of the things in this room would not survive stirring around, right? I certainly don't want it done to me. So this is suppose you can just rearrange everything. What's the most likely thing to come out? Well, it's this, okay? So this is high likelihood. It's also bogus. And this is high performance, and this is like the real internet. So you can say, okay, we did a bunch of other ones, but that's not important. So the question is, what do they share in common? They have this power law node degree. Now, the internet wasn't really a power law, but we're going to give them that error. We'll say, okay, suppose that wasn't a mistake. There is a power law internet degree distribution that sort of looks like the real internet, and it doesn't look at all like that. So you uncheck and say, okay, here's the educational network at the time. And it's plausibly close to this. Very high bandwidth, low degree, because that's a constraint. If you're going to have very high bandwidth on your links, you've got to have very few links, because you only have a certain amount of throughput. And then the edges can be very high degree. So this could be like Caltech and everybody who's on, EDU or whatever, or Caltech Secure or whatever. Okay. So this is realistic, but it's actually just solving an optimization problem to lay this out to produce optimal traffic. Okay. With a few constraints. We put some constraints on it. Okay. So anyway, so now you can you can put this in the space where on one axis you put how likely it is to arise at random, and then here's what its performance is. And these are as opposite as can be. Like in the space of possible graphs, with performance, even you care about performance, you put performance in here. These are as far apart as you can get, right? Okay, so engineering, that's not just the optimal, but it's actually how it's more or less how it's built. And then you got this thing down here, which is, so now you can see what they said. They said, okay, this is the most likely network consistent with the data, which they didn't really look at. And then they said, and if in that thing, if you hit those two nodes, the internet falls apart, okay? Sensation, right? Okay, so again, sensation, okay. So I figured out how to get an abstract with no words. The set of legitimate applications of scale-free networks, because that's what they applied. Because, oh, by the way, what they did was absolutely standard in physics. All the time, always wrong, always standard, okay? So, So what happened was the paper I just showed you was in PNAS, not in Nature. Okay. We submitted it to Nature, and again, I like to go for these records, right? So we set a record for the most number of days that the editors debated the paper before not reviewing it. 60 days. Now, it turns out, at the end of this, they said, we're not sending it out for review. I'll say a little bit more about that, but the reason I know all the gory details of what happened in Nature was when the paper was not sent out for review, all the biology editors, or a bunch of the biology editors at Nature flew here and spent a whole day with me, making sure they understood exactly what was wrong with this, because they were getting a flood of papers like this on biology, okay? So I spent a whole day with these editors really making sure they understood it. And then we would go through the biology applications. It's wrong here, it's wrong here, it's wrong here. No, these things are not scale-free. These things are not scale-free. It's the opposite of all this. Okay, so anyway, so that's how I know all the gory details of what happened in those 60 days. Okay. So by the way, they went back and got fired. But that's not as causal as it sounds. This was sort of the last straw. So they were going to leave anyway and start PLOS biology, but they left on pretty bad terms. Okay, but I got a whole story. So what ended up happening was the biologist said, first of all, there's nobody at Nature who actually knows anything about the internet. So like downstairs, there's the guy who's run the websites, right? So they kind of know, right? But there's like, they don't have any mathematicians, they don't have any engineers, so they have no idea. So it's an argument between the biologists who are saying, if this is wrong, we're seeing it everywhere, we got to know that, right? And the physicists were saying, like, over our dead bodies, we're not going to even send this, we're not even going to consider this. Okay. So they went to the editor-chief, was a physicist, and he said, just get rid of this, I don't care what you do. So they went with this very, like, this letter was just incredible, right? So they said, we're not sending it out for review because the process of review was to check if your paper is correct or not. We don't have an opinion about that. We don't care. It doesn't fit our editorial profile. By your own admission, everybody who knows anything about the internet knows that we're right. So it's not newsworthy, right? And I go, wait a second. So I talk to them about, I go, look, your readers don't know that. They go, yeah, well, but it's still not newsworthy. We don't, and also, basically they're saying, if we retract this paper, the Nature paper, they used absolutely standard methods from statistical physics. You're saying they're all wrong? I go, yeah, they're all wrong. All the way down. You can, so, and that's in contrast. We saw this morning like CERM and LIGO. So physicists do unbelievably cool stuff. It's just in statistical physics, they screw up like this. So anyway, okay, so let me move on. Okay, so, oh shit, I gotta stop. Okay, so let me see, I'll tell you one more thing. Okay, so the idea is that, what happens here is the apps are swappable and diverse. The middle is not, the OS. And then the hardware is fairly swappable and diverse, and this is this diversity hourglass. And you see this everywhere in systems that function well. Okay, so lots of examples. Okay, so baseball's a really cool example. Baking is a good example. Legos, good. Transportation. Clothing's pretty good. Okay, so here's buildings. So this is like shear layers in buildings. What they say is, okay, you've got a structure, and then you've got these services, and then you've got the solid wall. But everything else can change. So what that lets you do, this architecture lets you change the apps in your house, like furniture and all this other stuff. That can change a lot really quickly. And the other stuff can't change, and it's because you have frozen this and done it in the right way that enables you to be safe and be able to put any kind of furniture in your house so it doesn't leak and stuff like that. Or at least that's used to be true. Anyway. Also, clothing, right? You build clothing in layers. What you want is so why do you build these architectures? Because you want something that's fast and accurate, but you don't have any hardware that's fast and accurate or software that's fast and accurate. But if you combine in the right way, you get fast and accurate. Same here. And what you get is also horizontal transfer. So bacteria swap genes. That's why they always beat our antibiotics, because if one of them, one bacteria gets antibiotic resistance, they swap it with everybody. One kid gets an app, and then everybody's got it, right? And then we got memes. Like right now, we're swapping memes, and language enables that, right? All sorts of stuff that you can do with this, right? So what actually can go wrong in this, okay? Not what's fantasy wrong, what actually goes wrong. And it's the same thing all over, is what happens is, this is universal. If you find a bug there, you're in. You own that network, okay? And so bad genes, bad memes. Anyway, so we're just inundated with this kind of hijacking now. Everything we have has been basically taken over by viruses or something like that, bad memes. So what's humans' biggest problem is we believe things that are really bad to believe, but they're the things we hold most dear, the stuff that is destroying the planet, right? So anyway, okay, so I should stop. Let me just end with something. Okay, I was going to tell you about, this is Yori's thesis about diversity sweet spots, why we have architecture. So read that paper. Okay, I want to finish with something a little light. Okay, so clothing. So the idea is that, what does this work for clothing? You have a shell and a base, right? And no one of these is soft and weatherproof, right? If you just wear the shell, it's going to really itch and stuff like that. And if you just have this on, you die in the cold, right? Not here, but, I mean, you can wear this here, but, okay. So you layer them on, and all of a sudden, you get this diversity of sweet spots. So if you combine them, it feels soft, but it's weatherproof, right? Now, it could be a little bulky, but then there's alternatives, there's levels. So you have the fabric, and then you have the threads, and then you have the fibers that make up the threads. So these are levels, and that's layers, and those are orthogonal to each other. And if you don't, so that's a lot of confusion. Okay, so you get garments, and they have, okay, so I'm going to skip it. So let me see if I'll just end with something clever, if I can find it. Okay, we're going to skip the biking, okay. But this biking game, everything has been reproduced by high school students. So we figured if we can get high school students to do it, they can explain it to their professors across the campus, or their fathers across the campus, some others. I don't know how that's not working so good, so anyway. So let me skip ahead to the latest obsession. EBOs, my new interest, EBOs. Elephants, bonobos, and orcas, they're the EBOs. And what I'm telling you is what they don't do. They don't have organized work, they don't murder each other, there's no infanticide, there's not really an inequality. Now they're violent, I mean this is the biggest, baddest thing in the ocean, right? But there's no fear and anger, there's none of that stuff, right? So why am I telling you what they don't do? Because that's what chimps do, all of them. So chimps and bonobos are basically the same organism, but they have completely opposite social organizations. And then you have the elephants, the bonobos, and orcas, and they are completely different organisms, but they have the same social organization. So what is that architecture? What are the layers? Okay, so what about humans? Well, we're chimps with big weapons, basically. So we do these things on a scale that chimps could only dream of, right? Okay, and it doesn't, like, where in the world is this, right? You can't tell. I mean, this is Texas. Anyway, so is there hope? Is there any way out of this mess that we've made? Okay, so, and no humans. I'm not going to talk about humans because you can't. It's like I'm on a Caltech campus. If I say anything about humans, somebody's going to be pissed. Okay, and if you actually extrapolate in the obvious ways about human, everybody gets pissed at you. Okay, okay, they're intelligent, they're long-lived, social, and they're very different. Okay, so what's the basic architecture? Well, mammals, mom and baby, right? That's the heart of mammals. Okay, and they're all mammals. Okay, so maternal care and love. So what is the architecture? Well, mom controls the baby, but does so with love. Okay, and make sure that the goods and the care also flow. So there's the flow of goods and care, and then there's the control. So you want to make sure the kid, I don't know, I haven't had kids, right? But you all know like what's going on here, right? This is like the opposite, right? I'm gonna label. I have to be careful with the labels here, so I'm going to call these owners, and I'm going to call this labor. And the idea is that the control is kiss up, kick down, and it's control, it's ruling, right? And then the goods all go to the owner, right? And so these come together in patriarchy in this architecture, okay? And so basically, basically this is to create, we'll see, soldiers for these guys. Okay, so how does it scale? Wait, okay, so how do you scale? Well, this way you scale this over here is you add Granny, okay? Because Granny really cares about preserving this, okay? What you do is you put a soldier in here, and this makes it super scalable. So you build a hierarchy out of here where you have the soldier. And so we could elaborate on this endlessly, but it's easy to see in the chimps, okay? So how does this work? This is called a patriarchy. Males rule and dominate, okay? And they dominate all the females, and there's a hierarchy in the males. So the top that dominate all the bottom. It's all fear, anger, and violence. So everybody's scared all the time, and violence all the time. War, murder, and fanticide. So that's patriarchy. That's humans too, but I'm not supposed to talk about humans. Okay, so this is not a matriarchy. There's no mother rule here. We don't even have a word for what this is. It's not matrilineal. It's not matriarchy. It's matri-love. So, like, try to find, those of you who know Greek and Latin, come up with a good name for this, right? With matri something, okay? Now, there are matriarchies. Like the most murderous mammals on the planet are meerkats, and they're a matriarchy, and they kill each other all the time. Nasty, nasty, nasty. Okay? But they're stupid. So these are smart animals, okay? Males have no leadership role at all in these societies. So are they mistreated? No. They are pampered. Moms put much more effort into bringing their boys up because a hot young boy is going to have a whole bunch of babies where her daughters are going to have them one at a time, right? So you invest in the boys, all of them do. So the males fight, but they don't hurt each other. They just fight for attention, right? Because the females imagine if the females were making all the choices, right? So just minor injuries, no death, no warfare, okay? Completely the opposite of this, right? Okay, so if you want to read about this in humans, there's two new books out that are really good. This is also a movie called Origins. I think the movie is called Origins, but the book is called Caste and Origins. And this is another good book. I mean, I'm not going to say I agree with them on everything, but like I agree with them like 100% more than most of the literature in this area. So I would really recommend these two. So anyway, I'll stop there. So my favorite architecture. So maybe we'll add in this to the applications of the things I learned from Stephen about architecture. Now, it's a pretty bizarre one, but it's maybe getting that part right is maybe all that matters. I mean, like, so what if we have big data centers, if we kill ourselves, or just, fry the planet, and, so this whole emphasis on sustainability, you're going to lose. But I hope you win. Because the people on the bad side have too much power. So I don't know how to fix that. But this suggests, you might think that this suggests we should have more diversity in our leadership. Temporarily. But in the long run, we don't need any diversity in our leadership. We need grannies who have a lot of grandchildren and give a shit about the future and make really good decisions. There's still stuff for men to do, right? Men can, I'm not saying men are better mathematicians than women, but they're okay at it, right? So if men just did math, everything would be fine, right? Or play football. I don't think anybody should play football, but if anybody's going to play football, let it be men. So there's things for men to do. We're really good at killing things. Sometimes that's necessary, okay? But we're terrible at this, so we should stop, okay? I'm not talking about humans. Sorry, this is my recommendations for the future of chimps. Okay, sorry, I made a mistake. This has nothing to do with humans. Okay, and nothing to do with it. Anyway, so anyway, it all started with Stephen and my wife, so that's it. Do we want to have questions? What? What is that? Oh, I don't know. What is that? Who put this? Okay, anyway, so, yeah, you notice, so we both have our Chinese names up. So, because we make all the Chinese people write their names in like Romaji, whatever we call it. So I figured out, okay, and Yori came up with this, because I want something that sounds okay, like Doyle, or Dao Yao, but also means something really cool, right? And both Japanese and Chinese. So what does this mean? Yori, what does this mean? Yeah, a brilliant path. I kind of like that. Okay, anyway, so. So the other one was annoying rant. And I decided, no, don't go with annoying rant. Let's go with brilliant path. Okay, so anyway. Can we have a question? Anybody want to ask a question? No, nobody wants to ask. You want to eat. What?
Is the brain a layered architecture?
Say again?
John, is the brain a layered architecture?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I skipped a whole bunch in the middle about Yori's thesis.
Just to follow up on that, is the neural network with ChatGPT a layered architecture?
No.
So what do you conclude from that?
It could be better. It could be a lot better. So one of my students, Carmen, she graduated last year. Oh, and she got the Clauser Prize, best thesis in all of Caltech, based on 8 papers. I was a co-author on one of them. Her real advisors were James and Nick, right? And that's pretty typical. So actually, I've had 4 Clausers. 2 of them are here. Javad and Fernando both got Clausers. So I, as this great advisor, as this unbelievable advisor, have had 4 Clauser Prizes out of 30. That's like more than almost any department other than physics and biology. And how many papers did they didn't write any papers with me, right? And the other person who won the Clauser was my wife. Now, I can definitely say I recruited her to Caltech, right? So she was a tenured professor in medicine at UCLA, and so she decided to do a sabbatical here. And I said, why don't you just do a PhD? I mean, you're board certified in 4 medical subspecialties. You just found out that somebody else on the planet has 4 boards. You got to get a PhD, so she get a PhD. And actually, I wrote a lot of papers with her on stem cell biology, and you saw stuff about architecture. So she really got me interested in this architecture stuff. But the notice is, I count these people as my Clausers. I should really be honest, they're my recruits, but once they got here, they did a lot of things other than me. So I'm good at recruiting, particularly for Stephen, I think, anyway. So less good now, maybe, but because we're a little further, because I didn't do so much power anyway, so. Stephen wants to talk a little bit.
Yes.
Yes. Now the rebuttal.
The rebuttal, that's true. Again, just like in the morning, there are a lot of inflated praises. So a little bit embarrassing, but. We all know John is an extreme point, so he talks in extremes. But one thing we don't have to worry about with John is ambiguity. But I know we're all eager to get to the food, but I do want to request a few minutes of your attention just to say thanks to everyone. So I am truly grateful, really, to have known, work with, and also learn from all of you. It's wonderful. Whatever each of you is good at is amazingly good. It's amazingly. So you may not know, but Z can tell you how much of your unique strengths have been a constant source of inspiration for me. Thank you all very much throughout my time at Caltech. So I just want to say a few words of thank you. Let me first thank everyone to come to this reunion, especially those who are not local. So when Li Jun told me that he wanted to do this thing, I say, well, no, everyone's busy with their lives. I don't want to bother anyone. But he convinced me this is a real opportunity to bring all of you back to campus. Some of them I haven't seen for many, many years. Some of them I'm yet to meet. So it's great. And I was against asking anyone non-local who's not a former student or postdoc. But Lina convinced me to compromise. So thank you very much, Srikan, Fernando, and Minghua. Thank you. I also like to thank again Li Jun for his tireless effort in initiating and organizing this reunion. And I think it brings back a lot of former students of John and Adam and many, so it's wonderful. And also thank Lina and Christine for organizing this thing. It's a tremendous amount of details to iron out and also surprises to tackle. So we can all appreciate, I guess, for the students, how much effort it takes to get everything just right to prove a theorem or to take care of the corner cases in building a system. This is hard. This is the same thing, harder. Also, I'd like to thank David Wei for his generous support that made this financial support that made this possible. Thank you very much. Also, student helpers, Yiheng, Nico, Twilling, and Miles G. So I still remember vividly the summer 2003 when we had the whitewater rafting. Z was just old enough to join the rafting, and also the 2017 last reunion at Santa Barbara kayaking, and Christine organized all of them. But now I'm getting old. My memory is decaying. So this time we have videos to help us remember. So I'd like to thank Elizabeth, Asher, an extremely talented musician and wildlife photographer, also a family friend, and her LA colleague, Noah Tingen, for the audio. And also Caltech Academic Media Technologies, Leslie Masfield, Becca Rose, Charlie Savage, and also Ian Galindo. Okay, so if you can give me a few more minutes. Let me close with two stories. And I'll use John as an example. Well, he's an extreme point, so it's not a good example, but I'll use John as an example to show how many of you, what you did, what you said, have impacted my own trajectory, sometimes unknown to you. In particular for John, I may not have the opportunity to know any of you, if not for John. So back in the 90s, I was a faculty member at University of Melbourne. Between 96 and 2000, before I joined Caltech. In 1997, so it's interesting, Srikant reminded me that he heard me talk about this optimization flow control in 98. I completely forgot about that. So I read a very nice paper. It's a single author paper, early paper by Frank Kelly in early 1997, proposing this utility maximization as a framework to think about rate control. And the first thing one would do when you look at a convex optimization, you just look at a dual. And immediately, the decentralized structure just fall directly out of that utility maximization problem that he formulated. And that actually immediately mapped to the ATM networks, not the automatic teller machine. It was the asynchronous transfer mode machine, which was believed until mid-90s that will take over the world from desktops to backbones. Everything is going to be ATM. It was the big thing. And if you look at the rate control people were discussing for ATM network, it fits the dual part of the Kelly's utility maximization really well, just like what Srikant explained this morning. And then that same structure also emerged if you look at the IP network, which was starting to go, the whole networking community was starting to transform from ATM network to internet around 96 or so. So Infocom 96 was actually a threshold moment. So David Lapsley, so when I first started at Melbourne, David Lapsley was just starting his PhD, working with another faculty on ATM, and he built a really sophisticated simulator. And I convinced him to implement this simple idea, and then we submitted a paper. So the reason I guess it was 98 was because during Australian summer, which is December to February of 97 December to February 1998, that's Australian summer, I visit Bell Labs every summer. So during that, that was the time when I worked out the convergence proof, and then I guess in 98, that was what Srikant talked about. So on my way back to Caltech, I actually gave a talk February 98 at Berkeley about this thing. So once I was back in Melbourne, so David and I were very hard to think about, can we make this practical? And then we come up with the REM idea, because the big issue is how do you feed back congestion price to the sources to react? And David was an expert in building systems, and he started to build this system, the completely distributed system in BSD. If I remember correctly, it's a free BSD in user space, but completely distributed. And then I started to talk to Praveen Varai at Berkeley and Melbourne to try to set up a test bed between the two schools and try to test this thing. So we wrote up a two-part paper. We submitted to the conference. I sent a draft of this two-part paper to Frank Kelly in November 98. And I visited Frank Kelly at Cambridge in June 1999 and gave a talk at the statistics lab Cambridge. And I think it was during that trip to Cambridge, I swung by Caltech, and I gave a talk in EE hosted by Bob McLeese. John Doyle was in the audience. So he was, I guess he was excited because around the 90s, there's a lot of heavy tail phenomenon that emerged on the internet. Everywhere you look on the internet, you see that heavy tail. And John's idea is that that must be a consequence of trade-offs. And the way we looked at congestion control was optimization, which I guess fits the worldview of John's worldview of resources, constraints, and trade-off in architecture. So we talked, he asked me to visit again, which I did in 499, and then he asked me to apply to Caltech. So that's started the first generation of Netlab, and a very close collaboration with John, Fernando, Srikant, Harvey, and many others. It was such an exciting time. I'm very grateful. So part 2 of the episode, some of you have heard. So why I switched to power system. So we started this the company, FastSoft, to commercialize FastTCP. I took a 2-year leave to run the startup. I didn't know anything, made all my mistakes, and I returned in late 2008. And I read 2 reports from Berkeley Lawrence Lab. The first report says that the idea of cloud computing is going to take off this time, because that idea has been around every decade. The idea will come and then you will fade it. But then the argument was that all the technologies are coming together, and therefore cloud computing is going to happen. And therefore data center is going to be more and more important. And the second report was on the data center uses a lot of electricity, like Adam was saying this morning. It was at the time between 1.5 to 2%. Now it's 20 to 40% or higher. And therefore, not many people in the Infocom community at the time were working on data centers, and no one cared about energy, just like what Adam was saying. So Kevin and I got a little grant from DOE to look at energy efficiency for data centers, but from algorithmic point of view. So we work with Adam and group. And then one day I ran into John in the corridor. So I was telling him, oh, we're working on these exciting problems and all of that. So, oh, yeah. And then at the end he said, I wonder what happened to the other 2% of electricity. So I had no idea. So I started to read DOE reports on smart grids and other papers, and then realized how critical and urgent the energy problem was. Moreover, the amount of investment and talents in the energy space were way lower than what would be needed for energy transition. So I started to work with many who were setting up, revamping the smart grid at Caltech. So he set up the collaboration with SCE, who not only funded our research, but also had engineers to attend our weekly meeting where we were learning. So we're all learning from scratch, reading undergraduate textbooks because we knew nothing. So that really started the second generation of Netlab, and close collaboration with Manny, with John, with Adam. So thank you, John. You're directly responsible for today's reunion. Well, thank you for your patience.